Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's stakeholder meeting for the Joliet Alternative Water Source Program. My name is Tracy Morse, and I will be facilitating the meeting today. We're excited to have nearly 80 people joining us for today's meeting. To get started, I'd like to start with some introductions and introduce our panelists. We have Allison Swisher from the City of Joliet, along with Amy Wagner from the City of Joliet. And from the consultant side of the panelist team is Joe Johnson from Stantec and Teresa O'Grady from CMT. The purpose of today's meeting is to provide an update on the program. And to get started with the agenda, I'll go through some meeting details about how to get to provide a question. We'll go through some of the background or history on the alternative water source study, and then we'll dive into more of what's happening here in 2020 for the program. And then we'll hear from Amy Wagner from the City of Joliet about what the Water Conservation Committee is doing in conjunction with the program. And then we'll head into the question and answer panel discussion. And with that, I'm sure many of you will have questions during our presentation. So I just wanted to give a little tutorial. You'll see on your screen, you should have a control panel in front of you. If by chance it's not expanded like what it's viewed here on step 3, you'll just need to go over here in step 1 in this orange arrow, click on that. It will then expand into this medium size control panel, and you'll see the word question. Just click on that, and then it will be fully extended to where you can enter in your question here and push send. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, but during the question and answer session, I will be reading your questions and the panel will be answering them at that time. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the project website in the event that you want to re-listen to it, or if others were not able to attend the meeting today. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Allison for some opening remarks and to start us off with the presentation.
Hey, thank you, Tracy.
Allison?
Yes, thank you, Tracy. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have so many people in attendance. You know, we had a course planned for these stakeholder meetings to be held in person, but we're really excited to be able to do this virtually. And I think we might even have, more people participating than we would have had otherwise. So I know I've probably met a lot of you over the past couple of years as we've been working on this project, but for those of you who don't know me, my name's Allison Swisher, and I am the Director of Public Utilities for the City of Joliet. So I know some of you have been following this for the past 2 years and are very familiar with all the work we've been doing on finding an alternative water source for the City of Joliet, but I know some of you are new, and we're glad to have you getting involved. So I'm going to kind of start from the beginning and provide some background information to hopefully, get those of you who haven't been involved up to speed on the work we've been doing. So I'll just jump in here. So a lot of people don't know where our water comes from in Joliet. So the easy, quick answer is that our water comes from the ground. We have 21 deep aquifer groundwater wells and 5 shallow aquifer wells. And from those wells, we pump about 19 million gallons on an average day. After that water is pumped out of the ground, it goes into one of our 11 water treatment plants where naturally occurring radium is removed, as well as iron. Then from the treatment plants, it's distributed to your home through about 663 miles of water main. So it's a very large and distributed system. where our water goes. So in 2019, about half of all the water that we pumped was used for residential purposes. We serve about a population of about 150,000 people that are customers within Joliet, as well as some portions of Channahon and unincorporated Will County. The remaining water then is used for commercial businesses, industrial users, and then governmental entities. Just wanted to provide some information on Joliet's water history. It's always good to know where we came from so we can help guide us in the future. So the original Joliet Water Works was actually a private company that was founded in 1884. This was then purchased by the city of Joliet in 1888, and that exists the original drift wells, which were located on Hickory Creek, had a combined yield of 1.25 million gallons a day. And actually this facility here that's circled is our existing water and sewer service center located at 921 Washington Street. So the Department of Public Utilities has been at this site for almost 140 years. The first deep well then was constructed in downtown Joliet in 1907 on Ottawa Street. And actually that well was in operation until about 10 years ago. And so initially the wells were artesianal, meaning that no pumps were needed. The water levels were so high in the aquifer that the water just came out of the ground. However, very quickly, we noticed that the water levels were dropping and pumping equipment had to be installed. And then even in the 1930s, they even had to lower the equipment in the wells so that the water could be pumped. In the 1960s, it was first identified that the aquifer was not sustainable. At that time, other communities, such as communities in DuPage County, started looking at switching to Lake Michigan water, and that they did end up doing that switch in the 1980s. However, communities in the Will County area still relied on the aquifer. In the early 2000s, Joliet began looking at the Kankakee River as an alternative, but ended up deciding to stick with the aquifer because of the uncertainty on the time frame for when desaturation would occur. You know, at the time in the early 2000s, there wasn't the data available that we currently have. So it was estimated that we could have anywhere between 30 and 100 years left to rely on the aquifer system. However, in 2015, with updated groundwater modeling completed by the Illinois State Water Survey, we were informed that actually that desaturation was not potentially 30 to 100 years, but actually 15 to 30 years. That information then motivated Mayor Oedeker to reestablish the city's environmental commission, which was tasked with identifying an alternative water source for the city of Joliet. So our current problem, we know that the existing water source will not be able to meet our maximum day demands by 2030. We know the aquifer is not sustainable. There is no debate on this issue. And we know from the updated information from the Illinois State Water Survey that 2030 is a firm deadline that we have to meet. So there's no time to spare on trying to find a new source. We're not going to be able to use the aquifers in the future. So there's no choice but to find an alternative source. So because of this, we started a study, and this was a comprehensive study that was completed in 2 phases from August of 2018 through the end of 2019. The first phase evaluated 14 different water source alternatives. And really the goal of the study was to look at every option possible. We know there had been a lot of focus on the Kankakee River, but we really wanted to make sure that we looked at every alternative so that the best source could be selected for the city. The focus of the phase 1 evaluation was on water quality and water quantity. So we looked at sources such as the Fox River, the Kankakee River, the Des Plaines River, the Illinois River, Lake Michigan, and we even looked at the possibility of recharging the existing aquifer. So when we looked at all of those for quality and quantity, it was then narrowed down to 5 different alternatives for further evaluation in phase 2. In phase 2, we looked at the 5 alternatives that are on the screen: the Illinois River, the Kankakee River, and then 3 variations of Lake Michigan water. It should be noted that all of these alternatives were evaluated for 2 different water demand scenarios: a 30 million gallon per day scenario and a 60 million gallon day scenario. The 30 MGD scenario would be enough water to support the city of Joliet. A 60 million gallon day demand scenario would support Joliet plus potential regional partners. From day one, it's always been recognized that Joliet is not the only entity that is impacted by the declining aquifer levels. This is a regional problem, and a regional solution is what we need to be looking for. So I know Teresa will discuss this in more detail during her presentation. So during phase 2, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement. We recognized how important it is to have the residents of Joliet involved in what is probably the biggest decision that the city would be making, this year. So we had a number of workshops that were held for the city council. We also had monthly environmental commission meetings, and we did a lot of outreach at local community events in addition to our billboards, e-blasts, and social media posts. We also then did a community survey and held a public forum in December, at which time the public was invited to provide comments on the phase 2 study report. A lot of people wanted to know how we could possibly make this decision, especially the city council. There's a lot to consider, and it's a very big decision to make. So we tried to break this down into various decision factors. So the first decision factor is raw water quality. And really the question you ask yourself is, what is the quality and variability of the raw water source? This is important to know because the quality of the water can impact the ability to process and treat the water. And we know that any water, can be treated to drinking water standards. However, there is still the perception that certain water is not of the right quality and people wouldn't want to drink it. For example, there were a lot of concerns that the Illinois River would not provide a quality water source to the city of Joliet. The second decision factor is water quantity. Does the raw water source have sufficient quantity for not only Joliet, but also the region? And for quantity, one of the differentiators that popped out was looking at the river options, because during periods of drought, you would have to look at a backup source. So in evaluating water quantity, we had to look not only at the quantity in the source, but also what would happen if that source was not available. So for this reason, looking at the Kankakee River, it was not a viable option, given that there would not be enough water in the existing aquifer to provide that backup supply. The next decision criteria is the implementation risk. Will this alternative be easy to implement? There's a lot of items to consider: the schedule, the permitting, and the magnitude of the improvements. It's important, again, as I mentioned, that 2030 is a deadline that we have to meet. So we have to be able to look at the risks associated with meeting that schedule. So for example, when looking at the different alternatives, the Lake Michigan via a new Indiana intake option was considered to have more risk because it's not an existing water supply. The next non-cost decision factor is looking at the operations and maintenance. Does this alternative require significant O&M responsibility, and especially O&M for improvements outside of the city? When you look at all of the options, the alternative water sources, there is a significant component of O&M. However, certain ones, such as the ones that have water treatment plants, would require more operation and maintenance. The last non-cost decision factor is control. Does the city maintain complete control of their water source? This would be control over rate setting and control over the implementation. So for example, under the purchased water options, such as purchasing water from the Chicago Department of Water Management, the city would not have control over either rate setting or the implementation of improvements within that system. So that was focusing on the non-cost decision factors. Of course, cost was the #1 question we received last year. Everyone wanted to know how much it was going to cost and how much more they would have to pay each month. However, calculating cost is not that simple. There are many factors to consider, and those are shown on the screen now. The first is financing. There are fees associated with borrowing money to pay for construction of the projects, so those must be factored in. You also have to factor in the operation and maintenance costs. Each alternative has slightly different O&M costs, and that again is the cost to operate and maintain the system. Next is capital improvement costs. I think this is easy for everyone to understand because this is the costs associated with the construction of the new infrastructure. How much is it to build a water treatment plant? How much is it to build a transmission main? That information was all factored into this component of the cost. And then lastly, there's water supply and water access costs. For the purchased water options, there's a cost to purchase the water. And for other options, such as the Indiana option, there's a cost to access the water. So all of these components had to be rolled up into the overall total cost that was then presented when evaluating the alternatives. So looking at the cost and non-cost decision criteria, still a lot of information, and had to kind of try and find a way to boil it down so that the City Council and public could understand how the alternatives compared. So what we did was staff evaluated the criteria and prepared the table that you now see on the screen. Each of the alternatives was ranked based on each of the criteria. And then this was then used by the council in decision-making process. You could assign a specific weight to each of the criteria based on your opinion of the importance of that criteria. And this exercise was done at the November 2019 workshop. So I very quickly have gone through the background of the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. However, I know it's a lot of information and you might want more information. So there are the phase 1 and phase 2 study reports available on the project website if you would like more information about the evaluation of the specific alternatives. These are very large documents, and so there'll be a lot of reading for you if you are interested. So after much consideration and input from the public, the City Council took 2 actions at the January 7, 2020 council meeting. The first decision was selecting Lake Michigan water as the alternative water source for the city of Joliet, and this was a unanimous decision. Next, the City Council directed staff to simultaneously investigate 2 of the Lake Michigan alternatives. These are the Lake Michigan water via a new Indiana intake and the Lake Michigan water purchased from the Chicago Department of Water Management. And so now let's take a closer look at these 2 options that we're going to be evaluating further in 2020. So the first is the new Indiana intake alternative. And I'll just briefly describe what you're seeing on the map. So with this option, a new intake on the south side of Lake Michigan would be constructed, and this is currently showing it to be occurring in the vicinity of Hammond, Indiana. However, we are also evaluating possibilities of working with other communities in Indiana for the intake location. Raw water from the lake would then be pumped through approximately 47 miles of transmission main to a new water treatment plant located on the east side of Joliet. Now this route that's shown on the screen is very conceptual. It was used for the purposes of estimating construction costs, and we are currently in the process of further refining and evaluating this route. Once the water leaves the water treatment plant, it would then be distributed through the City of Joliet system. So the costs for this option range from $900 million to $1.1 billion. Those costs depend on whether this is a Joliet only solution or a regional solution. We know it's very important that that cost then be identified as a impact on the water bill, so that the residents could understand, what those costs mean to them. So in looking at the cost to the resident on a monthly bill increase, and again, this is in 2030, and in addition to the existing monthly rate, the increase would range from about $68 to $56. And again, this is dependent on whether it's a Joliet only or a regional solution. It's also important to look at the 50-year total cost. For the new Indiana intake alternative, the 50-year total cost would range from $3.9 billion to $5.4 billion. This is a lower 50-year total cost than the purchased water from Chicago Department of Water Management option. Other major differentiators is that this option would allow for the city to have total control over water rates and implementation. However, we recognize that there's greater implementation risk due to the project complexity and the need to cross state lines. The second alternative being evaluated further in 2020 is purchasing water from the Chicago Department of Water Management. For this alternative, the city would construct a transmission main approximately 30 miles that would go to the existing Southwest pumping station that is owned by the city of Chicago. From there, then the water, which would be finished water, would be pumped through the transmission main to a receiving station on the east side of Joliet. And again, this is a very conceptual route that was used for the purposes of estimating costs. It is again being further refined along with the costs in 2020. Similar to the other alternative, I will briefly go over what the costs are. The capital costs for this option range from $550 million to $650 million. This translates into a typical water bill increase. Again, this would be the value in 2030, and in addition to existing water fees, would range from approximately $60 to $52. And you can see here, again, that there is a benefit if there was a regional solution implemented, because by distributing the costs across more customers, we can lower the costs for everyone. And in this option, the 50-year total cost is greater than the 50-year total cost for the Indiana option. Other major differentiators include that this is an existing water supply, so therefore there's less implementation risk. And there's also a lower initial monthly bill increase. Just want to take a deeper dive into the estimated average water bill increase. I know this is a major question on everyone's mind and impacts everyone greatly. So currently, the average monthly water bill for a resident in Joliet is $30.75. This is based on average water use of 700 cubic feet per month. We know that some of you may use less, some of you may use more, but this is just an average that we're using for comparison purposes. So the amounts shown in the bars are in addition to this amount. So that would mean that if the Lake Michigan Indiana intake option was implemented, we would take whatever the rate is at the time of the implementation and add this in addition. So we know that there may have to be additional increases in water rates over the next 10 years to accommodate other needs separate from this project. So during 2020, we'll be further evaluating these rates and refining these monthly costs and able to present the public and the City Council with better information, more refined information at that time. There's been a lot of confusion about what your utility bill does and doesn't include. We understand that when you get your bill in the mail, it's more than $31 a month. That's because your utility bill also includes garbage and sewer, as you can see on the screen. Garbage and sewer add an approximately additional $65 on average. That means the average typical utility bill is almost $100, while the water portion of that bill is approximately $31. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited about switching to Lake Michigan water. Lake Michigan was the most sustainable alternative that was evaluated. The lake and the Great Lakes are the largest source of fresh water on the earth, and we are very fortunate to be located in close proximity to take advantage of that. Over 5 million residents are currently using it as their water source, so it is a known source of quality water. We have been saying this from the beginning that Lake Michigan is seen as the gold standard in drinking water. It doesn't have the natural hardness of well water, so you can get rid of the hassle and expense of maintaining a water softener. And while you're getting rid of your water softener, you can also stop buying bottled water. You shouldn't need to pay for that service anymore, given that we'll be getting this high quality Lake Michigan water. So I briefly want to go over the program schedule. Again, our end goal is to have the new water source flowing out of your pipes by 2030. So there's a lot of work to be done. Starting in 2020 with the alternative evaluation and final selection. With this information, it'll be presented to the City Council in November with a decision on the alternative water source by the end of the year. Then, after the source is selected, we will go into preliminary design. And then, after preliminary design, there'll be about 3 years of final design. We prepare all of the construction documents that will be needed to build the new infrastructure. We then anticipate that for either option, we will have a 5-year construction period beginning in 2025 with a new source of water online by 2030. So the first step of our program was to hire an engineering team to lead us through this over the next 10 years. After a formal selection process, the city selected the Stantec team based on their qualifications. The Stantec team includes many of the team members from the Phase 1 and Phase 2 studies. So we're able to move forward with all of that institutional knowledge that we gained over the last 2 years. The project managers for the project will be Mr. Joe Johnson with Stantec and Teresa O'Grady with CMT. You'll be hearing from both of them later on today. So there's a lot of work to be done in 2020, and we've already hit the ground running. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa O'Grady now with CMT, who's going to go through the activities that are planned for 2020 in more detail.
Thank you, Allison. My name's Teresa O'Grady. I'm with Crawford, Murphy and Tilley. CMT led the Phase 2 and Phase 1 studies, and now we're part of the Stantec team, as Allison had mentioned, working on the alternative water source program implementation. So I'll be talking a little bit about the overall program schedule, and then specifically discussing the 2020 initiatives this year and how you can get involved. So to start out with, the alternative water source program consists of the planning, design, and construction of a new water source for the city of Joliet by 2030. And you can see the program schedule is on your screen right now. This is actually on the project website at rethinkwaterjoliet.org. And the schedule over the next 10 years is broken into 4 distinct timeframes. And Allison gave you the overview. This goes into a little bit more detail on that. So 2020 is the alternative evaluation. That's the first column on the slide there. At the end of 2020 is when the City Council will select the water source alternative. Then in 2021, the selected alternative will continue into preliminary design. And that's design up to about 30%. The goal of that is by the end of the year being at 30% design to allow for the city to apply for the WIFIA federal loan. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a little bit here. Then from 2022 to 2024 would be final design over a 3-year period. And then from 2025 to 2030 is a 5-year construction timeframe, such that by the end of 2030, new water would be flowing to the residents. So in the next several slides, I'm going to be focusing on the initiatives in that first column in the 2020 alternative evaluation. And the effort in 2020 is focused in 3 major areas: program oversight and outreach, external outside coordination, and engineering. So the first major area of focus in 2020 is program oversight and outreach. And there's several components that are part of this, but a few of these I want to touch on in more detail. First of all, the intent of this and having this public outreach and these public meetings is to maintain program transparency. And we're doing that through meetings such as this, the stakeholder meetings, also through education and elevating the value of water in public outreach in 2020. Also developing the overall implementation program for both of the alternatives. And that involves not only determining the schedule required for implementation, but also identifying potential risks and ways to mitigate those. And the goal of this program oversight and outreach is to develop a prospectus for each water source alternative. And this will be delivered to the City Council for each water source alternative, and it will highlight those decision factors associated with each alternative to allow for a side-by-side comparison so that the City Council can make the decision on the alternative water source by the end of 2020. So 2020 public outreach, I'm going to be talking about City Council workshops, the quarterly stakeholder meetings, and the public forum in more detail on the next slides. But a couple things I want to touch on to make the public aware is the fact that we will be doing a monthly newsletter. And we actually published the first one last week. And the first edition was May of 2020, and it just highlights what's happening with the alternative water source program. And it's a good way to stay involved. The newsletter is on the website and can be accessed there. Also, we'll continue with social media posts, e-blast, and other public outreach. So if you haven't joined the mailing list on the website at rethinkwaterjoliet.org, please do that to stay informed. So first of all, during 2020, we'll have quarterly stakeholder meetings like this one, our first one being held today. And the purpose of these stakeholder meetings is to provide periodic updates to the public on program status. And with each meeting, the public will be given the opportunity for questions to be answered by city staff and project team members. And this one is virtual because of the COVID environment, but we're going to see how this goes, and we think the next couple may be virtual as well. So stay tuned, because the second meeting is planned for July, and then the third meeting would be held in October. In addition to the stakeholder meetings, there will be 3 City Council workshops. And the first workshop will be held on June 23rd. We don't know exactly what format that will be, whether that will be virtual or in person. So stay tuned for more information on that. The first workshop will focus on priorities that will factor into the City Council's decision, and making sure that the evaluation addresses those priorities to allow for the City Council to make their decision by the end of 2020. The second workshop will be more technical, focusing on transmission main routing, water treatment, and regional governance, and that will be held sometime in August. And then the third workshop, similar to the workshop held in 2019, will be where we will present the results of the alternative analysis and specifically those prospectus documents for each of the water source alternatives. And this will all culminate in the public forum that's again planned for December of 2020. And this will aid in helping the City Council to make their decision on alternative water source by the end of 2020. So as I said, the results of the alternatives evaluation will be presented to the City Council at the workshop in November. And so the public forum will be held at the beginning of December to answer questions of the public and obtain public comment so it can be provided to the City Council for them to make their decision. The second major area of focus in 2020 is outside external coordination, and this involves several aspects of the project. The first of which is talking to communities such as Chicago and other Indiana communities to talk about water supply and water access and develop those terms and conditions that would be associated with agreements for water supply and water access. Also, it includes taking a leadership role in bringing together potential regional partners. Joliet has been working on this over the past year with potential neighboring communities that could partner with the city on this program. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. As well as I'll go into more detail on the development of permitting plans, as well as refining the funding strategy in 2020. In addition, there is a portion of this external coordination involving governmental outreach to aid in program implementation. So Allison talked about the current problem that the city has and why the new water source is required. The declining water levels in the aquifer, which will ultimately result in desaturation of the aquifer, is not just a problem for the city of Joliet, but also a regional problem. Groundwater modeling performed by the Illinois State Water Survey in 2018 and earlier this year shows that regional communities will also be impacted by the declining water levels even after Joliet switches water source. So because it is a regional problem, we feel that there can be a regional solution. The City of Joliet has been meeting with regional communities to discuss the potential for partnering on the alternative water source program since last year. This effort will continue in 2020 and even intensify. While the city is fortunate that they don't need other communities to participate in the alternative water source, the phase 2 study showed that it is more economical for the City of Joliet and its residents if other communities participate in the solution. So the focus will be with the 16 communities surrounding Joliet that were included in the phase 1 study, as well as talking to Oswego, Montgomery, and Yorkville. Another part of the effort in 2020 is developing permitting plans for each of the alternative water sources. Permitting can be a major risk in the implementation of a large improvement program. There are several permitting agencies involved. As you can imagine, Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. And that's for overall program implementation and permitting. There's also specific permits required for a Lake Michigan intake and transmission main. And so part of 2020 is reaching out to all those communities and establishing the requirements that then can feed into the overall program implementation and program support of the program. In addition, in 2020, we'll be refining the funding strategy. And the funding strategy was originally developed in the phase 2 study. And right now it consists of 3 major components. WIFIA, which is the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. It's a federal low interest loan program. Also includes SRF, which is a state revolving fund loan, which is a state low interest loan program, and the balance being revenue bonds. The city was fortunate. It was the first community in Illinois that was invited to submit a WIFIA application, and that can cover up to 49% of the total program cost. So we will look at this funding strategy in more detail in 2020 and specifically look for opportunities for stimulus or grant money. Anytime we can get low interest loans or grant or stimulus money, it can result in a lower cost for the residents in the long term. So the third major area of focus in 2020 is engineering. And this goes into a little bit detail on those scope of services, but overall, what we are doing in 2020 is refining the improvements in order to refine the cost estimates. It's digging into deeper on those water facilities, looking at siting, looking at transmission main routing, and really trying to establish the requirements of those in order to refine the costs. In addition, the team is evaluating the water treatment process and the water quality for an intake location and talking about that with IEPA. Also, we are preparing a water source transfer plan. We have a consultant on our team that specializes in corrosion control in these water source transfer plans, and we're working with them and IEPA to make sure that when the water switch does happen in 2030, that the residents will not be impacted as in regards to water quality. So that's a key component of this 2020 effort. So there's several opportunities, and I've talked about some of them on how the public can get involved in 2020. First of all, if you're not signed up for the mailing list, please do that. Visit the website at rethinkwaterjoliet.org. You can join the mailing list there. Also attending public meetings, not only the stakeholder meetings, but the city council workshops that are scheduled throughout the year. You can learn more about water and the program through monthly educational topics. The first 2 topics were posted to the website earlier this month. They will also be highlighted in the newsletters, which are the next bullet there. For following progress, take a look at those monthly newsletters. They'll be posted to the website probably the 3rd week of each month, and we'll give you an update on not only the program, but activities that you can get involved in from public meetings to stakeholder meetings to workshops, and spread the word. Talk about this with your neighbors. Make sure they understand what's going on so they can get involved as well. So with that, next up we have Amy Wagner, who is the Deputy Director of Engineering for the Department of Public Utilities at the City of Joliet, and she will be speaking to you today about water conservation.
Thank you, Teresa. Again, my name is Amy Wagner, and I am the Deputy Director of Public Utilities for Engineering. And I will be giving the presentation of the Water Conservation Committee. Originally, this was formed 2 years ago as a subcommittee of the Environmental Commission. So our overall goals for the 2020 committee remain the same as the original goals that were established for the committee. And they are to incentivize with programs and policies, to empower both citizens and business owners, to educate through public interaction, and to motivate people to take action. So in 2020, we are continuing both the low flow toilet replacement rebate and the rain barrel subsidy program. The low flow toilet rebate program is a $100 rebate that's offered to water customers who replace a high volume toilet with a WaterSense certified high efficiency toilet. The low flow toilet replacement subsidy was successful in 2019 with 20 eligible toilets inspected and 8 replacements completed. We are also continuing the rain barrel subsidy program. This is offered in conjunction with the Conservation Foundation and Upcycle Products, and it is a $30 subsidy on a $65 rain barrel, which makes the overall cost of the rain barrel $35. And this is eligible to water customers at 1 per household. So in 2019, the rain barrel subsidy was hugely successful, with 122 subsidized rain barrels purchased and an additional 6 unsubsidized barrels purchased for a total of 128. So far in 2020, we have also had an additional 55 subsidized and 3 unsubsidized barrels purchased. So the 2020 goal in empowerment is to empower local businesses who can have an impact on water conservation. This is being addressed with the restaurant initiative, which was discussed at the end of 2019 and at the 2020 goals meeting. The idea here is to encourage restaurants to reduce water usage by only bringing water to customers who request it. This not only reduces the amount of water used for drinking, but also reduces water used to wash unused glasses. We are also wanting to encourage water efficient appliances and fixtures in businesses, perhaps through an award program. The Water Conservation Committee has met with representatives from several local school districts to discuss the development of educational materials that the city can provide as an aid to local educators. These materials can identify the motivation behind the water conservation movement in Joliet and educate about the depletion of the aquifer and the need to change water sources by the year 2030. This program will also provide water conservation ideas that kids can bring home to their families. So for the Motivate goal, last year we distributed materials such as shower timers and temporary tattoos. And these were a big hit in 2019. And they were used as giveaways at local events to motivate area residents to participate in the conservation efforts. This year we have designed window clings for bathroom mirrors as a reminder for kids and parents to shut off the water while they're brushing their teeth. The city is also now partnering with several organizations to expand the reach of the water conservation effort. In 2019, we held our first Water Conservation Day at the Joliet Slammer Stadium. We had planned a second annual event this summer, but we're not sure if that will happen due to the pandemic. We've also increased our outreach on social media and also with other advertising campaigns such as the Pace Bus advertising effort. So now I will turn it over to Tracy for the question and answer session.
Thanks, Amy. A lot of great things happening at the Water Conservation Committee. So to get started, I just want, in case some of you have joined after we showed how to ask a question at the beginning of the meeting, I'll just go through this really quick. Each of you have a control panel. In order to expand your control panel so it looks like step 3, just go ahead and click on this orange arrow and expand it. Push this question area here and then type in your question. We do have quite a few questions, more lengthier type of questions in the queue right now. So I'd like to get started. Again, we have our panelists, Allison Swisher from City of Joliet, as well as Amy Wagner, who you just heard from the City of Joliet, Joe Johnson from Stantec and Teresa O'Grady from CMT. So to get started, in regards to this, there's quite a few questions in regards to COVID and how it relates to this project or the effects of this project. One being, and Allison, or actually Joe, you might want to, this might be one for you. So I'll go ahead and read this. During this COVID crisis, we've seen how states can respond to various residents' needs, like healthcare, in various ways. What concerns are there with dealing with the state of Indiana for a water source for residents in the city of Joliet and other residents in a south/southwest suburban coalition? There's a little bit more here to that. Also, the Ansler Middle Steel Plant in Northwest Indiana has been known to pollute Lake Michigan, which closes beaches and recreational areas. What concerns are there about pollution problems for Lake Michigan water source with the Indiana industry? So, two-part question of this. So, what concerns are there dealing with the state of Indiana's water source as it relates to the residents of the city of Joliet? And then also, what are the concerns about the pollution problems of Lake Michigan water source with the Indiana industry?
Yeah, Tracy, I'm happy to jump in on that one. This is Joe Johnson. With regards to water quality in Lake Michigan and the difference between an intake potentially in Northwest Indiana versus on the Chicago side, the individual that asked the question is correct. Obviously, the northwestern part of Indiana includes lots of industry along the lakefront, and there have been challenges in the past with some industrial discharges in that area. So that is a key factor, and in fact, one of the current aspects of the project that's underway is a detailed review of water quality data in Lake Michigan. There's an extensive body of data from the city of Chicago, and there's also significant data that's collected by the Illinois EPA and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. So we've compiled all that data to get a good understanding of what those conditions are. And then in addition to that, as part of the evaluation of the Indiana option, we're doing a screening evaluation of potential intake sites in Indiana to understand what are the factors there that may govern where an intake would be desirable, or perhaps where it would not be desirable. And certainly proximity to any potential source of pollution is a concern. Also, other issues are navigation channels, coastal variations with sediment and currents in that part of the lake. So we understand that there are a lot of issues to be addressed, and that goes to a key part of this analysis, is defining what is the appropriate level of treatment that would be required for an Indiana option. Is it potentially different than what the city of Chicago currently uses for its facilities? And making sure that we adequately build into our estimates of cost, the right cost for construction and operation and maintenance of those facilities. And Tracy, I guess just to touch on as well, I wasn't sure if it was built into that question, but you mentioned the reference to COVID-19 and concerns there. I guess I just want to mention on that front as well that there is research, has been research going on for a number of years into virus deactivation in wastewater and water treatment facilities. COVID-19 is, I think, the seventh coronavirus that's been identified in the past as something that potentially infects and makes humans sick. It's obviously the most recent and the focus of our current concerns. Research has generally shown that certainly while viruses can exist in wastewater, so in sewage or wastewater flowing into wastewater treatment systems, the typically well-operated systems that disinfect their effluent with traditional methods of chlorination or ultraviolet light that's highly effective in deactivating and killing the viruses. And certainly processes or the research has shown that modern water treatment processes that use filtration and disinfection are highly effective in deactivating and killing viruses as well. So it is certainly a concern we need to be aware of. I guess and while the research on this current virus is more limited than some of the others, there is a significant body of information out there regarding treatment and removal of viruses from water sources. So again, that's a consideration that gets built into our analysis of the treatment processes and the costs. But we see that as something we need to be aware of, but we don't see it as a game changer in terms of something that will dramatically affect the approach to this analysis.
Thanks, Joe. The next question is in regards to going over state lines with this source. Ellison, you might want to start off on this. Joe maybe might have some insight as well to bring in. But although dealing with the city of Chicago for a water source may seem daunting for some, what issues are there dealing across state lines with the state of Indiana?
Yes, thanks, Tracy. I can start with this and then get input from others. We understand the added complexities, and from day one and the phase 1 study have been trying to answer those questions to remove some of that uncertainty. We have had conference calls with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, who would be that's the IEPA in Indiana. We've also met with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. So we feel that through those discussions, we have a plan in place, to how to proceed to, mitigate some of those risks. Teresa, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I mean, you covered it. One, I guess, benefit is that we would be working with the community in Indiana that would help us to navigate some of those challenges with crossing state lines. And so that's part of the discussion with the different Indiana communities for lake access through Indiana.
Right, thanks, Teresa. So in regards to there's a question about the intake in Indiana. If there's something you can add on to Teresa or Joe. Could the Indiana intake be moved just a bit west into the Hegewisch area of Chicago and stay in Illinois?
That's a great question, and in fact, that is part of what we're looking at right now. So the area of Lake Michigan that we've been investigating, or we're currently screening for potential intake options, does extend into Illinois. The city of Chicago currently has 2 water treatment plants. Their southern water treatment plant, known as the Eugene Sawyer Water Purification Plant, is at about 71st Street along the lakefront. There is an area south of that facility between that location and the state line where there is potentially space for an intake. The questions that come up there, on one hand, certainly that approach would avoid the need to cross state lines, and there's some benefit there. We do have to have certainly discussions with the city of Chicago about obtaining access to the lake. And that's really, I think, one of the critical issues with the new intake alternative is, regardless of the specific location, Joliet will have to negotiate an agreement with another community to have access to the lake and to have permanent facilities there. And so the answer to the question is yes, that's being looked at, and that's already been brought up in some of our discussions with Chicago. So great question.
Thanks, Joe. And the next question is about permitting. Joe, you might want to chime in on this one. Have you accessed permitting and regulatory cost and risk with both of these options?
Yes, and that work is ongoing, and those are exactly the right terms to use. In our scope, we have a task focused on the development of permitting plans for each of the alternatives that would lay out not only the timeline, but the various agencies that are required. You can imagine that with between 30 and 50 miles of transmission main crossing multiple counties, multiple municipalities, you know, major expressways and railroads, there is a long list of permits that will be required. So those permitting plans are being developed as part of this year specifically so that we can build those details into the implementation schedule and into the costs. And then the other term that was used in the question, which is appropriate, is risk. With any project of this size, and certainly at this stage of the project, there is uncertainty around certain details. There are certain parts of the project that we won't be able to tie down until we finish design or we get final agreements with various partners. And so we have a formal risk strategy that's part of our current work where we develop a risk register. We identify risks to the projects, we rank those and review it periodically so that when we present the documents to the City Council at the end of this year to allow them to make their decisions, they have the facts that we can give them about both of the options, but then they also have an assessment of what are the risks, what is the uncertainty, and how might those risks affect each of the options. That will allow them to see the full picture when they have to compare the two options.
Okay, and Allison, you talked a lot about in your presentation, a portion of your presentation about costs. So this next question is about operating costs. And Joe, again, maybe something that you might want to add in here too. Does the operating cost include the increased manpower required for the new treatment plant operation and maintenance, including the future pension costs?
Yeah, so that's, it's a complex when you start looking at operation and maintenance because we do, currently have staff that operates and maintains our existing water treatment plants and well systems. So, when we transition away from using the wells as our primary source, we will then have staff available to potentially operate, the new water treatment plants. As part of the study, we are looking at developing staffing plans for each of the alternatives that would then be included in the evaluation. But yes, we did include the costs associated with adding additional staff for the options that included water treatment plants. Joe, you can elaborate if there's more to say.
No, I think Allison, you covered it very well. It was dealt with last year at a high level, and as you indicated, we're doing staffing analysis this year. Now that we've narrowed this down to a couple of options, we can look more closely at the skill sets and the number of people that are required. But yes, that's an important part of the overall equation.
So the next question is about municipality participation. Will Joliet allow other municipalities to tap the raw water pipeline, or do they have to buy treated water from Joliet?
That is something that we have been also discussing. There are other organizations that are, talking about water and would potentially be interested in purchasing raw water. So we have had conversations with industry as well. They have, purposes or uses that don't require finished water. So there's an opportunity to potentially sell raw water, not only to other communities or entities that might want to construct their own water treatment plant, but also to industry.
Okay. And Allison, the next, it's really a statement. There is embedded in here more of a question about stakeholders within Joliet of building that trust and that transparency that they have with the administration. Past administrations have not been held accountable for addressing the issues in the years past. Now the taxpayers is being forced to pay double from today's cost because of the lack of leadership foresight. How do we now trust that the best interest of the Joliet residents will be served when it is obvious that we are having to pay today's cost for cost of infrastructure rather than what we should have done years ago? My water bill has been more than doubled over several years, and now we're going to potentially double it again, and they're saying is outrageous.
Yeah, I understand the the frustration of why wasn't this issue addressed in the past. However, as I had stated, it was the information available at the time was not the same as the information we have available today. When we did our rate analysis last year, Joliet's water rates are in the bottom third in the region. So we have enjoyed lower rates than our neighboring communities for a number of years. And so, with that does come some, shocking numbers when you look at what increases could be. But I do feel confident that the process that we went through over the past 2 years to come to this point was done very transparently. There was significant opportunity for the public to be engaged in the process, and we are continuing, with that moving forward. So water is way too important, of a topic to, not have it be taken seriously or for it to become political. So, we are continuing to provide opportunities for continued, transparency, and we'll continue to update the cost information so that all Joliet residents can be kept informed of what's going on.
And Allison, like, it's going back to another topic of COVID. Will COVID-related impacts to the city's fiscal year 20 budget reduce the amount of the water main replacement planned for this year?
No, our water main replacement program is being funded through a low interest loan from the Illinois EPA. So that funding was already in place. So our construction projects have proceeded. We had 1% of replacement planned for this year, and we're currently in the design stages of the 2020 replacement program, which will also be funded through low interest loans from the state. We do know that moving forward, a component of receiving the Lake Michigan allocation is reducing our non-revenue water, and replacing our leaking water mains is a major component of reducing non-revenue water. So we do already in our rate analysis have that funding included so that we could actually increase our water main replacement from the current 1% to about 1.6%. So I do not anticipate that issues with COVID will have an impact on those programs.
Thank you, Teresa. Regarding the data sets and GIS, Joe, Teresa, what specific data sets or information layers has Joliet or Stantec secured or will secure from the state of Illinois for GIS purposes in accessing pipeline routes?
So I'll start this out, and then Teresa can jump in and add on if she would like. But there was an extensive effort during phase 2 of the alternative evaluation program to gather publicly available information from all the counties in the area, as well as national databases related to wetland conditions and other environmental factors that might impact the analysis. A key part of the work that we're doing this year on the engineering side of this program is to intensify that. So currently there's significant effort going on reaching out to agencies that are responsible for corridors. So for example, Department of Transportation, utility companies that have large utility corridors, pipeline companies, gather information from them in terms of what their infrastructure and land holdings are, and to have discussions around their willingness to cooperate with Joliet in establishing alignments for transmission mains. So the intent is to build a very large and robust database, and we've set up kind of a cloud-based GIS system that allows all the members of our engineering team to kind of work across groups and access that information, so we have a consistent database. I don't know, Teresa, do you want to provide any more details regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, in phase 2, we did get the information available from the county. We're going back to the counties too to find out any additional information that they might have available to just fill in any kind of gaps that we have to, as Joe said, have the most robust data available as we are refining these, in particular transmission main routing and costs.
Thanks, Teresa. So Allison and Joe, regarding some future short-term and long-term costs, at what point in the process will Joliet know all the legal terms, the conditions and costs, short and long, related to Indiana municipalities and or state of Indiana for the Indiana pipeline option?
So we are currently in the process of negotiating terms with both the city of Chicago and communities in Indiana. So we anticipate by early fall, we will have that information available to build into the the cost model. So we anticipate that then in the fall, when we present the evaluation results to the city council, we'll have that cost information built into the updated estimates to present to the city council.
Okay, and then regarding again about regarding Indiana, will the Indiana follow our right to Lake Michigan water through the Supreme Court ruling, or will they follow the Great Lakes Compact that they are signatories to?
I can jump in on that one.
Yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
In the phase 2 study, we had talked to both the Indiana Department of Natural Resources as well as the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and both of those entities indicated that Joliet would be covered under Illinois diversion for Lake Michigan. So the city is going to be making a application to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for Lake Michigan allocation as part of the 2020 effort. So that the intent of that is to have that part of the evaluation that's presented to the council for their decision making.
And Joe, did you have anything else to add to that, or?
No, I think Teresa covered it very well. I guess
okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. And then regards to risk register, I know, Joe, you touched on a little bit about risk, but is the risk register available to the public? Allison or Joe?
So at this point in the process, we've developed a template for the risk register. We've shared that with the city, and we've gone through an initial workshop with city staff to discuss and prioritize some of the risks. We're in the process of compiling the results from that. Certainly, as we go forward, the documents that we provide to the city council at the end of the year will definitely have a section on each of the options that will spell out the high priority risks that have the greatest potential to impact the project, what those impacts are, and what the mitigation efforts are that will be taken to kind of manage those risks so those can be included. I think as we go through it, we can certainly talk about figuring out how to put at least some version of the risk register out there so that people can see what the risks are that are being considered. And again, that would be a great area for folks to comment on. If people have questions about risks or areas that they see as uncertainty, we would welcome input from the public on that, because that is an area where having a broad perspective relative to the project is important to make sure that we understand all the risks and pull them in. So yeah, we'll certainly work to make sure we have information on that available as it is developed over the summer, and then will certainly be built into the documents that are provided to the City Council at the end of the year.
Thank you, Joe. Regarding the aquifer, Allison, even though the aquifer will no longer be used once the new pipeline is operational, how is Joliet thinking about long-term recharge of the aquifer from a sustainability and conservation standpoint, even if it isn't being used for a water source anymore?
So it will be important that we maintain the aquifer and our wells for the backup supply. So even with the Lake Michigan alternative, there's potential that there could be a catastrophic failure of the transmission main or some other issue that would require a backup supply. So we do intend to make sure that we are monitoring water levels in the aquifer so that it can be used as backup.
All right, thank you. Then the next question is about the North Point development. How will the North Point development affect water needs for the city of Joliet?
So we, when the North Point development was in the planning phases, we contacted the Illinois State Water Survey, and they did add an additional well to the cities in the vicinity of where the North Point development will occur. And what they found through their modeling is that the North Point development, given its location on eastern side of Joliet and not near the Sandwich Fault line, that it would not have an impact on the timeline of which the city would switch water sources. So what they do find is that we will first start to see declines and desaturation in the western well field. So we did not see an impact from the North Point development.
Okay, we just have a handful of remaining questions here so far. But going back to the GIS layers, Teresa, will the GIS layers include existing properties and boundaries dedicated under the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission system?
As I said before, we're getting the information that's available from the county, and ownership and parcels is some of the information that we are trying to get from the county. So the intent is that GIS database, once it's pulled together, will contain that property and parcel information.
Okay, thank you. And in regards to, I think we might have touched on this a little bit, but I will, there is another question about the community interest of other community interest. Has any other community expressed an interest in joining our new water source yet, Allison?
As Teresa had mentioned, we've been doing a lot of outreach with other communities, and there are a number of them that are going through, the same evaluation process that we did. So, at this time, we do not have, firm commitments in place, but we did not anticipate that we would. Our timeline for trying to identify regional participation is, the end of 2021. So we're going to really spend a lot of time over the next year and a half having those conversations with potential regional partners and getting agreements in place. So we are seeking, their input on, which of the two alternatives being evaluated, if there is interest in one or the other. So that information, will be presented to the City Council in November if there is a strong preference from a community for one or the other alternative.
Okay, thank you. We have a two-part, one comment and then one question. all in one. The comment is your presentations are well done and very understandable. Thank you. The question then from the same person is, are the presentations and slides available online on the website?
Yes, our website has pretty much every presentation that has been given, since we started with the phase one study. So if you go to the website and click on the information tab, you can find the presentations, and we'll be sure to post these presentations on there, as well as the video recording.
Okay, great. The next question is about eminent domain. Allison, you might want to start off on this, and then maybe, I don't know if Joe or Teresa chime in, but can Joliet use eminent domain outside of the city or in Indiana?
Yes, so that is a legal question. We have retained legal counsel special for this project to look at all of the nuances of land acquisition. There are a lot of potential issues when you're looking at the number of miles of transmission main that we're looking to construct. So definitely having tools in place to allow the city to proceed with construction is important, and that evaluation is ongoing. Teresa, if you want to answer more specifically.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that during 2020, as part of the regional outreach, we are looking at governance structures, and some of those governance structures has eminent domain as a component of that. And so that's going to be part of the discussion on the governance structures, which the attorney that the city has retained will advise the city on those benefits of the different governance structures as it relates to land acquisition.
Okay, it looks like we have a final question now, unless somebody else comes in with another one. And it's actually, this is more of a statement. All INPC information is not available for the counties. Joliet needs to get the complete list of INCP dedications from Springfield. If there's any follow-up to that statement.
Yeah, we'll certainly look into I assume this refers to the Illinois Nature Preserves comment that was made before, and so we'll certainly look into that. That source of information. I mean, as Teresa indicated, our goal is to get as much information as we can, so that as we're evaluating the routes, we can make good decisions about the trade-offs between various options for getting a pipeline between the source of water and Joliet. So I've taken a note on that one. We'll dig into that a little bit more and make sure that we're considering that aspect of the data set.
Great. Well, a lot of good questions here today. Certainly, if there are follow-up questions, if any of you think of something later today or in subsequent weeks, feel free to always leave a comment or question on the website, and we will get back to you right away. As we've mentioned a few times in the presentation, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter if you follow social media, as well as get the up-to-date information, the facts on our website at rethinkwaterjoliet.org. I will leave it to last closing remarks, Allison, before we end the webinar.
Yes, we wanted to thank everyone for participating. Please don't hesitate to contact myself or go to the website. I really encourage everyone to get involved. We do want to have input from our stakeholders, and we look forward to seeing everyone in July at our next stakeholder meeting. So thank you and have a great day.